Hello and welcome to the Public Finance and Taxation lesson. The subject is public-private partnerships. In our today's lesson, we will concentrate on contract/project agreements. Contract/project agreements. And in studying project/contract agreements, we will look at the project agreements as well as the duration of PPP and the applicable law. Now, candidates, a contracting authority that intends to finance, operate, equip or maintain an infrastructure facility, or one who wants to provide a service may enter into a project agreement with any qualified private party for the financing, for the construction, for the operation, for equipping, or even maintenance of the infrastructure or development facility or provision of the service of the government in accordance with the provisions of the Public-Private Partnership Act. So, a contracting authority, this could be a government department, a contracting authority, could be a government ministry, could be a department of the government, I've said, can enter into an agreement with a private party. So, a contracting authority that intends to finance, it may also have intention of operating or maintaining infrastructure or even providing a service. Such an authority may contract or may enter into an agreement with a private party. Any qualified private party for the financing, for the construction or operation or even maintenance of infrastructure. Do you understand? Now, again, a contracting authority, which I said could be a government department, a government ministry, and a public entity, may, where it considers appropriate, it may designate its assets for use by a private party for the period of a project on such terms and conditions as the contracting authority may consider appropriate. So, where a private party is contracted by a public entity, this public entity may designate its assets for the use by the private party in the process of the private party offering to finance, to construct, to operate, or even maintain equipment. Now, candidates, again, subject to the provisions of the Act, a contracting authority may enter into a public-private partnership with a private party in accordance with the Act and in accordance with such other arrangements that may be approved by the Cabinet Secretary. And, what we call sector diagnosis, or what we call sector diagnostic study and assessment may be required to be carried out. So in other words, a contracting authority, prior to entering into a public-private partnership arrangement, should undertake a sector diagnostic study. Sector diagnostic study. Sector diagnostic study and assessment. Sector diagnostic study and assessment that covers the following areas. This sector diagnostic study should cover the following areas. Technical, should cover technical area, should cover the legal, these are technical aspects or issues, legal aspects, the regulatory framework, the technical frameworks, okay, technical frameworks, the legal frameworks, the regulatory frameworks, the institutional capacity. The institutional capacity. We have the status, institutional and capacity status. So the sector diagnostic study and assessment should cover technical aspects or issues, should cover legal, regulatory or technical frameworks, should cover institutional and capacity status, should also cover the economic, the financial, should cover the economic. This is the financial management, the financial, the economic, the commercial issues, the financial, the economic and commercial issues. It may also include issues that the Cabinet Secretary may stipulate. Any other issues that the Cabinet Secretary may stipulate. All right? So these are the sector this is the sector diagnostic study and assessment. It has to cover these areas. Then let's look at the duration of the project. Duration of the PPP. Duration of the PPP. Duration of the PPP. Now, in determining the duration of public-private partnership, a contracting authority should take into account certain factors. Factors to consider. In determining the duration of a PPP, a contracting party, a contracting authority should consider certain factors. The first one, obvious, is provisions of law. That's very important because the contracting party should not end up entering into an agreement with a private party in contravention of the law. So it's important that the provisions of the law are considered, any provision of written law. Lifespan of the technology to be used. It's important that the contracting party considers the lifespan of the technology to be used. If the private party is to carry out any work or project for a contracting party, then the contracting party should check the lifespan of the technology that the private party is going to use while providing services or carrying out the contract. The lifespan of the technology to be used or to be employed. 3, investment standards. The investment standards that are required to be maintained by each party to the project agreement throughout the duration of the partnership. What are the standards that the contracting party should uphold? What are the investment standards that the private party should uphold? These are factors to consider when determining the duration of a public-private partnership. Do you understand? The investment standards that are required to be maintained by each party to the project agreement throughout the duration of the partnership. 4, economic and financial, the economic and financial viability. The economic and financial viability of the project and the economic life of the facilities to be provided. If the private party is to maybe rely on capital goods or equipment, then the economic life of such assets should be taken into consideration. Now, when we talk about the economic life, then we may also need to consider the depreciation of the project assets. Depreciation of the project assets. What is the depreciation of the project assets during the life of the contract? Another point, important point, is the period of time that may be required by the parties to the partnership to meet and maintain throughout the duration of the partnership. We also need to consider the service delivery standards and investment levels. So these are some of the factors that ought to be considered. The provisions of the law, written law, the lifespan of the technology to be employed, the investment standards, economic and financial viability, the depreciation of project assets. I've talked about the period of time that may be required by the parties to the partnership to meet and maintain throughout the duration of the partnership, the service delivery standards, and also investment levels. So these are factors to consider when determining the duration of public-private partnership. And these are factors that the contracting party ought to consider. Now let's finally mention the applicable law. the applicable law. In the factors that we've mentioned, point number 1 is a provision of written law. So a project agreement entered into by a contracting authority under the PPP Act should be subject to the provisions of the laws of Kenya. Okay? Provisions of the laws of Kenya. So any contract that is to be entered into under the PPP Act, such a contract should be subject to the provisions of the laws of Kenya and any provision in the agreement. Any provision in the agreement that contravenes the laws of Kenya shall be void. So the applicable laws are the provisions of the laws of Kenya. If there is any provision in the PPP agreement that contravenes the laws of Kenya, then such provision shall be rendered void. And where there is a conflict between provisions of the PPP Act and the provisions of any other written law, then the provisions of the PPP Act shall prevail. So do you understand? First of all, if there is any if there is any law or any provision in the contract, if there is any provision in the PPP contract, that is a contract between the contracting authority and the private authority, then if such provision, if there is any provision within that contract that contravenes with any written law, any provisions of Kenya laws, then the provisions of the laws of Kenya shall prevail. But if there is any conflict, between the PPP Act and any other law, this could be any other Kenyan law, then the PPP Act shall prevail. Because the laws of Kenya are many. There are many laws, provisions. There are many acts of parliament, one of them being the PPP Act. If there is any other act that contravenes the provisions of the PPP Act, then the provisions of the PPP Act shall prevail. And candidates, upon the approval of the committee, it may be agreed to resolve disputes arising under the project agreement through arbitration. If there is any disagreement between the contracting authority and the private party, then such disputes can be subjected to arbitration or any other non-judicial means of dispute resolution agreed upon in the project agreement. So when entering into a project agreement, the parties, the contracting authority and the private party, should specify the way or how any disputes may be resolved. So it has to be expressly stated within the project agreement that in the event that there is any disagreement between the contracting authority and the private party, then such disagreement shall be subjected to certain arbitration. So they may decide to specify an arbitrator within the contract, or there could be an agreement at that point in time that if there will be any disputes arising under the project agreement, then such disputes can be resolved through any other non-judicial means of dispute resolution that is agreed upon in the project agreement. So that's all for today, candidates. We've studied the project agreements. We've looked at the duration of the PPP. Then we have identified the applicable law in public-private partnerships. Thank you. God bless you. Bye-bye.